Okay, the first step in creating a cereal box is to actually create the cereal box. So I'm going to click on a cube in my poly modeling tool set, and I'm going to make it the approximate size of a cereal box. You don't have to spend a lot of time on this, just be mindful. I always say, don't make a Costco cereal box, and don't make a DVD case. Okay, we're just going to make a cereal box, and I want it about that size. Okay, like I said, the size really doesn't matter right now. Just want to get the general shape of a cereal box. Okay, now I'm ready to open up my UV editor, and my UV editor is going to allow me to create an actual file that I can color on and then bring back into Maya and make it look nice and pretty. So to do that, I need to actually open up my UV editor window. To do that, there's a little button right here where it says Panels and then Save Layouts. Now I will tell you there are lots of ways to open up the UV editor. You can just go up into the UV up into the top and go and open up the UV editor that way. That's one way to work it, but because I'm dealing with kind of a smaller screen right now, I am going to go to Panels, Save Layouts, Pers/UV Editor. Okay. So on the left-hand side, I have my perspective view. On the right-hand side, I have my UV editor. Now the problem is every object that you create, whether it's a cone or a sphere or a plane, they all have their own UV map associated with them when you create it. The only problem with that is as you modify the shape, as you add edges, vertices, manipulate it, change it, extrude it, whatever you're going to do, it doesn't automatically fix that in the UV map. And without a UV map, an object will not have anything to display. So whether you're using a Lambert shader or a Phong shader or whatever it is, it's not going to show up when you render if you don't have a UV map. That's why when you create an object, every object has a default UV map so that it can actually display information. So I could actually take this UV map over here, this unfolded cube. I could take it into Photoshop. I could design on it, bring it back into Maya, but the problem is when I bring it back into Maya, whatever the front face here is going to be stretched out. Whatever the side face here is going to be squashed in and stretched out. So we want to try to get our UV map to match our box. And so there's a couple things that we have to do to make that happen. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is go to Modify and then hit Freeze Transformations. Okay, that zeroes it out. That goes into Maya and it looks at all the code and it looks at everything that's there and it resets the rotate, the translate, and the scale back to their default values without actually modifying or changing the box. So once I've gone in and done Modify, Freeze Transformations, I then go to UV. Now some of you might say, well, where's UV? I don't have UV in mind. Make sure you're in the modeling toolkit. If you're in the modeling toolkit, you should have UV. So we go to UV and we hit Automatic, UV Automatic. And that unfolds my cereal box into the different shapes. It basically cuts out each side. Now, I can take this into Photoshop. I can start designing on it. It would be a lot easier to design on this than to design on the cubes. The problem is which side of this face right here, which side is up and which side is down? Which side is right, which side is left? Okay, this we know is the side, but which side? Is it the right side or is it the left side? This is the top or the bottom. Looking here, when I select it, you can see it highlights the top, so I know this one's the top and that one's the bottom. But it becomes a little bit difficult if I try to kind of design without that. So I want to just tape a few of the edges back together. The proper term here in Maya is to sew the edges back together. So I'm going to sew a few edges back together. It's important not to sew every edge back together, because if you sew every edge back together, you've just created a 3D object. And that kind of defies the whole point of a 2D UV map. So I'm going to start sewing the edges together by right-clicking and holding and going into Edge mode. With Edge mode selected, I'm going to select the top edge. And it doesn't matter where you start. Really, you could start with any edge. I just have gotten in the habit of starting with the top edge and then kind of working clockwise. So I select the top edge and I go to Cut and Sew, Move and Sew. Then I go to the right edge and I go to Cut and Sew, Move and Sew. Then I go to the bottom edge and I go Cut and Sew, Move and Sew. Then I go to the left edge and I go Cut and Sew, Move and Sew. Now this is one that a lot of people miss because this looks like the unfolded box. However, there's one additional face right here that folks missed. So I'm going to click on that that edge and go to cut and sew, move and sew. And that's perfect. So essentially there are 5 edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 edges that you need to sew together. But this is the perfect UV map. I only have to do a couple more things to get it ready to send to Photoshop. What I need to do is I need to make sure that it fits inside of quadrant 1 here. Okay. Right now I have the left edge and the bottom edge, the left face and the bottom face rather, that are sitting outside of quadrant 1. So if I take a snapshot or I take a Photoshop network, those are not going to appear. So what I need to do is I need to highlight all the edges or UVs and move it so that it's sitting inside quadrant 1. Now if yours is rotated, you know, and it might be a little difficult to design like this, so I'm just going to rotate it. And to rotate it, that's all I did, is I just highlighted all the UVs. I hit E, which is the rotate tool, and I get it to fit right in there. I may need to hit R to scale it. If it's a little bit too big, I may need to scale it in. And I want to make the best use of space that I can. Looks like I'm just off just a little on my rotation. Perfect. Okay. Now I'm ready to take this over to Photoshop. Now, you could do a UV snapshot. A UV snapshot is going to allow you to make a high-resolution screen capture, essentially. It'll let me take this UV map and make an image that I can then color on and use for other things. The reason I like using PSD networks is PSD networks actually allow you to edit all of the nodes in one single file. When you do a UV snapshot, you have to have one file for the color, one file for the bump, one file for the normals, one file for the transparency. So it can be a little bit, it can get a little bit confusing. Where with the Photoshop network, you can pretty much have all of those right within one document. So to get this sent over to Photoshop, I go to Image, Create PSD Networks. Now, when I look through these options, I can see I've already made a mistake. The mistake that I've made is I have not changed the color of this. I've not changed the shader of this box, so it is set to the default of Lambert 1. And if we change Lambert 1, it could have unintended consequences later on in the file. So I need to change the color. The other thing I notice about pulling up this window here is that I have yet to save my file. So I'm going to actually just close the PSD Network Options box for right now. I'm going to save the file, just go File, Save Scene As, and I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to call this one Box Design 2. So apparently I already have a Box Design 1. So I'm going to have Box Design 2, save the file. Now I need to change the color. Now I could open the Hypershade hierarchy. There's a button right here that will allow me to open the Hypershade and kind of go through that process. I could also go in and go to Panels, Save Layouts, Hypershade/Persp. Okay, that's another way I can get to the materials. But for the sake of time, I just want to quickly change the shader on this. And to do so, I just right-click and hold and hit Assign a New Material. I'm going to choose Lambert because I don't want my cereal box too shiny. So now I've saved the file and I've changed the color. I'm ready to go back into the Photoshop wizard. So I go to Image, Create PSD Network, and up here is where it's saving. So it's saving in the source images of my project folder. I have Open Adobe Photoshop checked. I have increased the size from the default, which is 1024 by 1024, to 2048 by 2048. Now that's still kind of a small number of pixels, but it'll give us enough for what we're trying to do today. Okay, and then I'm leaving the rest just by itself, and right now I go down to Attributes, and I'm going to send the color attribute over. In a later video or a later part, I may show you how to bring in transparency and bump. But for right now, we're just going to bring in the color. So I find where it says color, and I can either click this arrow to bring it to selected attributes, or I can double click it, and it'll bring it over to selected attributes. Okay, that's all I need to get this set up, so I go ahead and hit Create. Hopefully that'll open up Photoshop for us, and that gets us to where we want to be for right now. The next video will be working on this file in Photoshop.